Fox News Podcast presents Bret Baier's All-Star Panel.
America's got to be in the lead if you want to deal with these threats. We're going to lead.
The mourning is over. The Shiva is done. And if you're a conservative, you should be optimistic.
You know, my main priority right now is making sure that it delivers for the American people.
We have to make our country great again, and I will do that.
I think the president gets criticized by people all the time for the stuff he says, by people who ignore what he does.
Now, Fox's chief political anchor, Bret Baier.
Former President Donald Trump is back on the campaign trail following a second assassination attempt. The FBI currently investigating how he was targeted while golfing at his West Palm Beach golf course, Trump International. The suspect, Ryan Wesley Routh, is in custody facing 2 federal firearms charges. Could be more charges coming. The former president spoke about the second attempt on his life during a live stream on the social media platform X Monday.
All of a sudden we heard shots being fired in the air, and I guess probably 4 or 5. And it sounded like bullets, but what do I know about that? But Secret Service knew immediately it was bullets. And they grabbed me, and we got into the carts, and we moved along pretty good. I was with an agent, and the agent did a fantastic job.
Meanwhile, overseas, Russian President Vladimir Putin is ordering the Russian army to increase its troop numbers by 180,000 as he continues threatening war with NATO if Ukraine uses long-range Western weapons, basically missiles. To discuss all this and more, we bring in our panel. Wall Street Journal editorial board member Bill McGurn, Fox News audio political anchor and Washington correspondent Jared Halpern, and Fox News political analyst Juan Williams. Bill, I want to start with the fallout from the second assassination attempt and all of this back and forth about rhetoric. The former president saying that the president and the vice president using threat to democracy, that he can't be someone who stands behind the presidential seal again, in how they talk about the former president, has spurred on some of these attempts, in his words. The left and Democrats in general saying it's former President Trump and his vice presidential nominee using rhetoric that escalates. So this back and forth is where we are.
Yeah, I mean, in some senses, that's politics as usual. I mean, I did find it extraordinary. The New York Times had an editorial that the New York Sun characterizes as basically blaming Trump for the assassination attempt on him. Look, I don't put too much stock in the idea that someone's language criticizing an opponent inspired someone take a shot at him. But I didn't put much stock in it when the accusation was against Sarah Palin. Everyone else was jumping on. So I do think it would be better if everyone cooled off and addressed things more respectively. But there's plenty of guilt on both sides there.
Juan, your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I just find it one of these moments where you think, what has happened to us, the American people, that violence is now so commonplace that you have the former president, suffering 2 attacks within about a 2-month period, Bret. And it's just, it's, to me, you have to just step back for a second and say, boy, look, our politics have become it's incentivized people to act in this way. Now, I don't think it's good either way, but I do think that it's incredible to me, and I think a political pivot point for former President Trump to say, oh, it's these horrible things that have been said about me, such as I'm a threat to democracy, when I think about the things that he said. I mean, most recently, the kind of hard things he said about immigrants in Ohio that have been just totally untrue, or think about, the things that he said in the past. And I mean, there's so many, you could just run through them. But the fact is, he's someone who has never been afraid to talk about body slamming, about, people being bad people and people who are trying to ruin America, and America's never been worse, and we're suffering through American carnage, and if we don't fight back. Oh, I mean, that's a Trump rally. So to me, stop it. I think Bill McGurn said it right. This is not good. And the prospect of him then saying, or his vice presidential nominee then saying, well, it's only Trump that's been shot at. Why haven't the Democrats been shot at? I find that appalling.
Yeah. And Jared, I mean, that's the place we are right now. Meantime, we still don't have answers on the first assassination attempt. And we are getting cryptic, messages from lawmakers who have been briefed, Senator Blumenthal, Congressman Waltz, saying that the American people are going to be flabbergasted by when this report comes out. Now, the report hasn't come out. We still don't really know all the answers on the first assassination attempt, and there are a lot of questions about the second.
Well, it sounds like the second one could get rolled into this broader task force, this bipartisan task force that Congress is launched in the aftermath of what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania. And you're right. We have heard both Republicans and Democrats kind of express dismay, not just at the findings of this yet to be released report, but the level of cooperation they say they are receiving from the Secret Service, that they don't appear to be fully satisfied with the level of detail they are getting from the Secret Service. You have President Biden, who has also said this is an agency that needs help. He is calling on Congress to provide additional funding, to provide additional resources. There seems to be a level of bipartisan agreement on that. But even if it's an issue of manpower, Bret, that's a long-term proposition for an agency like the Secret Service. There is months, years of training that goes into getting an agent ready for presidential level detail. And so even if it is a level of we need more manpower, we need more resources, that's probably not something that happens in the short term. I think that's why you've seen the Secret Service in the last couple of weeks say that they're going to turn to the Pentagon for some of this help, at least to get through this very busy campaign season between now and November.
Last thing on the rhetoric, Bill, you had J.D. Vance come out and say this is an opportunity to call for a reduction in the ridiculous and inflammatory political rhetoric coming from too many corners of our politics. He said, we cannot tell the American people that one candidate is a fascist. 10 days ago, former President Trump said Kamala Harris is the first major party nominee in American history who fundamentally rejects freedom and embraces Marxism, communism, and fascism. So it is happening on both sides and has happened on both sides, even as they both say they're in favor of toning down the rhetoric.
Yeah, Bret, when I was in the White House as a speechwriter for George Bush, I remember going through past speeches all the time, see what you can steal, and we're reading Truman and even Lincoln. You read the Lincoln-Douglas debates and the kind of attacks on each other. I mean, that was pretty heated too. The idea that this is unique to our time, I think, is different. What's different is now we have social media, instant communications amplifying it in a way that's not amplified if you're just reading it in a newspaper, 3 weeks after the event. So, I'd like to get past it. First of all, I'd like to get past it just because I'd like to see them debate more of the issues that people should be making their votes on, and not just name calling. But it didn't start with Donald Trump or Kamala Harris or Joe Biden. It's been going on a long time, and it's been pretty vicious if you look in the past. It's the idea that's only heated in our time, I think, is ahistorical.
Yeah. Meantime, Juan, it boggles my mind that the coverage of what Putin has said and what the tension level is in Eastern Europe with Russia and Ukraine and the threat that Putin has said he will do to NATO and Western allies with the use of nuclear weapons is not getting more attention. I mean, it seems like we're on a really precarious moment here with the threat of long-range missiles being used by Ukraine, provided by the U.S. and the West, and Putin saying if they are used inside Russia, we are retaliating on NATO, at which point the U.S. would be obligated under Article 5 of the NATO Charter to defend those countries.
Without a doubt. And I think the United States, here President Biden is our leader and as the current president, made that decision when he, in fact, said that he was sending those missiles to the Ukraine And the problem here is that he must have made a calculation, an informed calculation, about the extent to which this would provoke, Putin, the Russian leader. Because until now, the understanding has been that, well, Russia will limit its response to the Ukraine, but not go beyond those borders. Now, I think they have been, somewhat aggravated to see NATO spread. You think about Finland and others now joining in with NATO, so they are basically surrounding Russia. But I think Biden must have made a decision, along with his national security team, that the Russians know that they would be wiped out if they dared to challenge a far superior military force in the United States and NATO. But it's a risk, and without a doubt, it's a risk that could become explosive at any moment.
And Jared, I don't know. I just don't sense that people here in the U.S. understand what's going on. We've covered the story on Special Report many times, but I don't get that the level of knowledge about maybe how precarious it is exudes many places.
Well, I think there's definitely a fatigue factor when you think about how long this war in Ukraine now has been going on. U.S. policy has largely remained unchanged. There's certainly been questions. This has been part of the presidential debate and other debates within our political system about the role that the U.S. should or should not be playing as it relates to arming Ukraine and sort of bolstering these defenses in NATO. But you're right. These are significant warnings that have been leveled by the Russian president. At the same time, what you have heard from the National Security Council, other national security officials within the Biden administration, is that this kind of bellicose language from Russian leaders is nothing new. They are more concerned about what they are seeing on the ground. They are judging kind of the risk assessments and the escalation ladder based on those dynamics. And those dynamics must have changed over the last couple of weeks and months, Bret, just given the fact that you have seen the U.S. and other NATO allies ease up a little bit on some of the restrictions, not all, but some of the restrictions that were placed on how these Western supplied weapons are used by Ukraine.
Panel, we'll hold it right there. And Bill, our president is not that vocal on this very issue. When you were speech writing, President Bush was out and about talking about, even though it was unpopular, what was happening in Iraq and Afghanistan, and trying to rally support for some of the decisions they made. This is not that way. He doesn't talk about what's happening in Ukraine.
I think it's great weakness. I think Juan had it right that I don't think Russia's in position to challenge NATO. It's blustering and so forth. And yet Joe Biden seems to want to give the Ukrainians enough weapons to carry on the war, but not enough to prevail. And by prevail, I mean emerge from the war with its borders intact and Russian forces gone. And I think all the world should be interested in that. And so it's a great weakness that Joe Biden has. I think we should have learned from Vietnam about the folly of fighting a war we're not trying to win. And it would be a great opening for Donald Trump, except that he's ambivalent on Ukraine too. You don't know whether it's part of his strategy. I'm not going to offend Trump, Mr. Putin, and that way I'll get a deal. I don't mind the idea that he talks to Vladimir Putin, but Donald Trump doesn't tell us what he'll do when Putin doesn't take a deal. And I think that's a big question. So it's a real opening, I think, for Donald Trump, especially after Afghanistan. But he's not in a position to take advantage of it because I think his approach is only, the question is whether it's better. Would he really cut off all aid to Ukraine or not? If he had a stronger thing, go back to Ronald Reagan. He had a simple idea. We win, they lose. I still think when it comes to war, that's a good approach.
Juan, the former president's answer at the debate was not that clear or defined when it came to Ukraine. In fact, it was not really an answer about whether he wanted Ukraine to win. circling back to where we started in this assassination attempt, there's some indication that this guy has some ties to Ukraine and wanting action to support Ukraine. We don't know all the answers to that, but clearly it's part of who he was.
It is. And for a moment of humor, I'll tell you that recently President Putin was being interviewed and said he wanted Harris to win. Ha, 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 right? So then you see some of that reflected from Trump during the debate, but I mean, it's all, again, this is a very serious moment, as you said, that we should be paying more attention to, but it gets tied back into our politics in the sense that there have been reports recently that Russia is again intent on having some influence on our political process and the election of this year for president. And at the debate, when Trump was asked if he, in fact, wants Ukraine to win, coming back to it's better to be very clear in your intent when you're involved in a military effort that you want to win, he refused to say, yes, I want Ukraine to win. And the thought here is he, in fact, is still of an opinion, having said that he won in 2020, he's still of the opinion that if there was any interference, even going back to 2016, it was really born in Ukraine, and that there were people in Ukraine who were up to tricks and they didn't benefit him, and he was trying to prove it. And of course, that led to his impeachment proceeding. I mean, it's unbelievable, but this is directly tied into his framework and understanding of our political posture at this moment.
Yeah, and speaking of the threat to U.S. elections, Senate sources telling Fox there will be an all-senators classified briefing regarding foreign threats to U.S. elections tomorrow, 4 p.m., according to our Chad Pergram up on the Hill. So, all of that is, factoring in, Jared.
Yeah, listen, and that's nothing new either. We have heard for a long time from national security folks, the FBI, DHS, others, that adversaries of the United States have an interest in trying to meddle in U.S. politics. We have seen, obviously, indictments handed down over Russians and other foreign nationals that are accused of using social media to kind of foment that type of disagreement amongst Americans. I think the question is going to be not so much where it's happening and why it's happening, but steps that the U.S. can take to make sure that they're unsuccessful, at least as it relates to voting, as it relates to misinformation and disinformation that can cause not just political disagreements, but is sort of going back to where we started, actual violence, political violence aimed at candidates, aimed at local officials, aimed at supporters or anybody else. That has also been a concern that we've heard from a lot of these national security folks, that the goal here of some of these foreign adversaries is simply to sow chaos and disorder and kind of show that the American system of democracy is not all that it's meant to be or cracked up to be.
Yeah. Bill, final thought is, we're inside of 50 days now to the election, and we're in a position where these swing state polls, even after the debate, are really tight, most of them within the margin of error. And you've got a scenario where, a few shoes drop one way or the other and 10,000 votes shift and the election changes.
Yeah, and I think they can shift every day. Just looking at it, since Kamala Harris was nominated, it hasn't really changed that much. I mean, she climbed up past Joe Biden and so forth, but she's kind of peaked as Donald Trump has peaked. And I thought the debate was an opportunity for either of them, especially Donald Trump, to cut through the media cordon and hold her to account, get her on the record on some of these questions. But he didn't do it. He was allowed himself to be distracted by her, and he took the debate on like January 6th. The crowd saw us at a rally. I think, though, she didn't actually better herself much either. I think the real clear average is like half a point in the swing states in the average because people see her not answering questions. In fact, the first question, are you better off today than you were before the Biden-Harris team came in? She dodged it. It was a softball right to Donald Trump to say she didn't answer the question and then answer it for her. So it was a real, it was a missed opportunity to be a change maker in the policy. And I think we're going to go election day with very few events, unless they're outside black swan events like another assassination attempt or someone makes a big gaffe. I think it's going to close to the end. And I don't really look at the national polls. I just look at the swing states. And last I checked, I think Real Clear Politics had 3 of the 7 for Trump's ahead, only by a point or so. And the other 4, Harris is ahead, also within the margin of error.
That's right. I mean, the only poll that showed some serious movement, Juan, was Morning Consult came out and had her up 6 nationally. But in the swing states that have even since come out after the debate, 1, 2 points. There's some that the average is about 0.4. I mean, it's unbelievable how many of these 7 states, and it's possibly going to come down to a sixth of the population inside those 7 states. So you're talking roughly about 300,000 people deciding the election of 330 million Americans.
It's true. I mean, and you have to go inside. I think one of the factors coming out of the debate is the tremendous amount of money that Harris has managed to raise, and there's increased talk as a result about the fact that she has a better ground game or organizing game in many of these swing states. And it's really down to those 7 states. I'm going to take a risk here and just try to recite them, but I think it's Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. And in specific, the way that the thinking inside the campaigns goes, it would be that Republicans need Georgia. They need to retain, well, they didn't win it last time, but they need to win Georgia. And for the Democrats, it's Pennsylvania. And, so that's really what it comes down to. You said a few thousand votes. You're exactly right. In Georgia or Pennsylvania, it could be determinative. And, what you see right now is the Harris campaign saying we're putting the Trump campaign on the defensive, forcing them to spend money in places like Arizona and Nevada, where they previously were thought to be in good shape. But we've seen shifts now in those races. And again, if you were looking from the outside, you'd say it's a split. We don't know, but boy, the money does seem to be in Harris's pocket.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you, panel. Now for a bit of history. On September 17th, 1978, the Camp David Accords were signed, brokered by President Jimmy Carter between Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Egyptian President Anwar Sadat. The set of agreements aimed to end hostilities between Israel and Egypt, as Egypt became the first Arab country in the Middle East to recognize Israel's legitimacy as a state. Officially titled the Framework for Peace in the Middle East, the agreements marked a milestone for Israel's relationships in the region and ultimately led to a historic peace treaty between the two countries the following year. That'll do it for this week. You can hear more of this series at foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts. Make sure to leave a rating and a review. We want to hear from you. For Juan, Bill, and Jared, I'm Bret Baier. We'll see you next time. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.